crises that we've seen of 2011 will be fundamentally political, much more political in 2012 in ways that affect ordinary people. So far they only affect the analysts, they only affect the chattering classes, but they really will start to have impacts on ordinary people. A lot of crises during 2011 were essentially technical crises, and in 2012 I think they'll become overtly political crises. So we had a big crisis of sovereign debt and crisis in Europe that was essentially about banking and debt and leaderships. Well, next year that will be effectively political. And next year, remember, will be a year of blame. Everyone will be saying, who's responsible for this? It's all the fault of the bankers, it's all the fault of the Americans. And we're going into elections in America, elections in Russia, a change of leadership in China, elections in Egypt. There might even be an election in the United Kingdom. It will be a year of narratives, of stories, of people making accusations. The crises that we've seen of 2011 will be fundamentally political, much more political in 2012 in ways that affect ordinary people. So far they only affect the analysts, they only affect the chattering classes, but they really will start to have impacts on ordinary people. An awful lot of props have been knocked away from the international system that we have been familiar with in the last 2 or 3 years. And as those props disappear, people get very frightened, and so they tend to overreact. We have to play it long next year and to, as we wait for things to settle down. In a sense, we've got to live through the turbulence and give ourselves 2 or 3 years to understand the real dynamics beneath a whole series of things which are happening that we really don't understand very well at the moment. We are in the middle of the biggest transition in Afghanistan, and in the last 2 years the conditions have improved for the security forces. The numbers are there, the effort is there. In a sense, I think the Western world and the Afghan National Security Forces are winning the battles now. I still think probably they will end up losing the war, because even though they're winning the battles, fundamentally their position has been weakened by the determination of the United States to draw down some forces next year. And increasingly there are signs that this rather gentle move towards the exit may become an undignified scramble. If the Americans start to draw down lots more troops ahead of the American elections, then everybody will run for the exit. And ultimately, setting a date by which troops will leave Afghanistan, certainly in a combat role, is a recipe for undermining the work of the forces. So ironically, just as the international force is at its most effective in Afghanistan, in a sense it's had the rug pulled out from under its feet. Next year will be a year of transition, but I doubt if it will be deeply enough rooted to have a real effect after 2015, and I'd love to be wrong about that. Insecurity is coming back to Europe in all sorts of ways. Not that Europe is going to go to war again, but the fringes of Europe, the Eastern Mediterranean, the relationship between Greece and Turkey, the problem of Cyprus, the issue of the Balkans, the issue of the Baltics and their relationship with Russia. All of that is going to become much more sensitive next year. And one of the things that we might find ourselves clinging on to as the European Union goes through more and more crises, as it probably will, is NATO. I think that the major European powers will hold on to those forums that they've got which bind them together. And I suspect that as NATO goes to the Chicago summit in the spring, which is going to be a very big summit for it, nobody will question the relevance of NATO. The question will be, is NATO up to the challenge? There's a phrase that you should be careful what you wish for. And the British have had their military victory in 2011 in Libya. They've had the sense of separateness from the Eurozone in the crisis that the Eurozone is going through. But Britain will find, I think, that it is in a very difficult position in 2012 because the EU is trying to remake itself. That'll be a long and difficult process. And in a way, Britain will find itself back, I think, in the situation it was in the late 1950s. Does it help this remaking process, particularly among the North European powers, or does it stand aside? And its relationship with the United States is changing pretty rapidly. President Obama is the least Atlanticist president that anyone can remember. And so Britain will find itself, if it's not careful, somewhat adrift, standing aside from the EU arrangements, not particularly close to the United States, with some good capabilities behind it. But the implications of the SDSR, that we're going to have fewer facilities, fewer capabilities, and that we're going to use them differently. That's going to be tested in a pretty fundamental way. 2011 saw the effective dismantling of Al-Qaeda as a core organization in Pakistan. The death of bin Laden was pretty important. Zawahiri, the deputy who's now the leader of Al-Qaeda, has been pretty quiet. Al-Laki was killed in Yemen. So all of that is good from a counter-terrorist point of view. But 2012 will be different. We've got the Olympics. There is a new wave building out there. And although we don't know how big that wave will be, when it hits us, it will take a different form. There are lots more have-a-go individuals, self-radicalized people. And I think we'll see in the trials that are coming up in 2012 a lot of evidence of that evolution of the nature of the terrorist threat. So it hasn't gone away, it will be different, and it will be difficult to cope with. RUSI's research priorities for 2012, of course, are to monitor the ways in which changes in the Middle East will affect us. The Iranian crisis will almost certainly get worse next year rather than better, but also to put that in the context of some pretty fundamental changes in Europe. We've been looking at SDSR, at defense expenditure, at NATO politics. All of those sorts of things are relevant, but they will seem relatively trivial compared to the crisis that is building in Europe for 2012. I think our problems of security and our sense of insecurity and anxiety will come a lot closer to home next year. And we are trying to get ahead of that game and also understand it better.